When 8-year-old Daniel ran up to a black woman in a golden dress at a formal gala and called her mommy, the room laughed until a blonde woman in diamonds walked in and froze. Daniel wasn't like most 8-year-olds. While other boys spent their mornings bouncing out of bed, rushing for cartoons or cereal, Daniel woke slowly, carefully, because in foster care everything was fragile, even mornings. He'd spent the better part of his young life packing and unpacking trash bags, calling strangers ma'am or sir, and pretending their homes felt safe. He'd learned early on that being quiet meant fewer problems, and that not asking for too much, like a bedtime story or a hug, was the surest way to avoid disappointment. But then came Vanessa. Vanessa Carter wasn't the kind of woman who filled a room with noise. She filled it with steadiness, with calm. She was 36, a school teacher who'd grown up on the east side of town, where her mama taught her to be both gentle and unshakable. She had no children of her own, not because she didn't want them, but because life, for reasons unknown, had other plans. Her days were filled with kids' voices, pencils scratching tests, sneakers squeaking on waxed school floors. But her evenings were quiet. Her house smelled like lavender, her shoes stayed by the door, and jazz played softly on the kitchen radio. When Daniel arrived on her doorstep, suitcase in hand and hope long gone, she didn't ask too many questions. She just knelt down, smiled gently and said, "Hi, champ, I'm Vanessa. You hungry?" It wasn't the question that got him. It was the tone, warm, like syrup on pancakes, unhurried, unafraid, as if she already knew the answer and just wanted him to know she'd wait. That first night, he didn't say much. He stared at the ceiling. The sheets were clean. The air smelled like lemon. He was used to homes with shouting in the next room, televisions left on through the night, other kids crying softly behind thin walls, but here, it was quiet. The next morning, she handed him a lunchbox, not one with cartoon characters or superheroes, just blue, with his name written on a sticky note. "Daniel, you're braver than you feel. Love, V." It didn't take long before Daniel started doing things he hadn't done in years. He laughed, just a little. When she made a silly face over burnt toast, he asked, tentatively, if she'd help with math. And at night, when his stomach hurt from old memories or his breathing sped up in the dark, Vanessa would come sit by his bed and hum softly, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." She never tried to take the place of anyone. She just showed up day after day, like love does. No fireworks, no big promises, just consistency. And to Daniel, that was more magical than anything. He began to call her Miss V at first, then ma'am, and once, when he didn't realize she heard, he whispered "mommy" under his breath. She didn't say anything, but her hand brushed his hair that night with a tenderness only mothers know. Still, love like that doesn't grow in a vacuum. Somewhere else in the city, sipping wine in a marble kitchen and flipping through fashion magazines, was Rebecca Langford, Daniel's birth mother. A socialite, heiress, and headline darling, who had once been beautiful and broken in equal measure. 5 years ago, Rebecca lost custody of Daniel after a long string of nights she didn't remember and bruises she couldn't explain. Addiction, neglect, and dangerous company had torn her life apart. By the time child services stepped in, Daniel was barely 4 and had already learned how to hide under beds and hold his breath. Rebecca fought at first, hiring lawyers, putting on appearances, but deep down she knew she had not been the mother he deserved, so she let him go. At least legally, but emotionally. She still told her friends, "I have a son, somewhere." Daniel, of course, never heard from her. Not a letter, not a birthday card, not a single word. He stopped asking about her after the 3rd home, stopped hoping, because what's worse than not knowing where your mother is, knowing she's out there and still not coming for you? Back in Vanessa's home, Daniel grew. He still had questions, still got scared, but now there was someone to sit with him through it. She helped him name his emotions, like puzzle pieces he never knew how to fit. "That's called frustration," she'd say. Or, "You feel left out, huh? Let's talk about it." They'd make pancakes on Saturdays, watch documentaries about space and sea turtles. She let him paint one wall of his room any color. He chose orange because it feels warm. He called her Mommy. For the first time out loud on a Tuesday, after she helped him with a school project on galaxies, she looked at him, startled. "You don't have to," she said softly. "Only if it feels right." "It does," Daniel whispered. "You're the only mommy I remember." Vanessa didn't cry, not in front of him. But later that night, sitting alone on the porch under a sleepy sky, she clutched a baby photo of Daniel, one the agency had let her keep, and let silent tears roll down her face. She had promised herself never to get attached. To be a safe bridge, not a destination. But this boy, and this quiet, beautiful boy, and had changed her life just as much as she'd changed his. They didn't talk much about Rebecca. Daniel didn't ask. Vanessa didn't push. But both knew that past still existed. It just wasn't invited into their everyday anymore. Until one day, out of nowhere, an envelope arrived, thick paper, fancy gold trim, a formal invitation, a charity gala hosted by Rebecca Langford and the Langford Family Foundation. The invitation was for Vanessa. It was a trap wrapped in silk. But she didn't know that yet, and neither did Daniel. Vanessa never liked fancy events. She preferred soft mornings, coffee in hand, and the chatter of kids in her classroom. But when she read the invitation again, honoring the students of Eastbrook Elementary, she knew she had to go. Daniel's school was being recognized for their literacy program. And Daniel, well, he'd won second place in a citywide essay contest. He'd written about the person who makes me feel safe. Vanessa hadn't read it. He'd tucked it away, shy and smiling. So she said yes. She borrowed a gown from her cousin, smoothed it nervously in front of the mirror and adjusted her curls. Daniel, in his little suit, looked up at her and whispered, "You look like a queen, Mommy." Her throat tightened, but she smiled. "And you, sir, look like my prince." They walked into the grand ballroom together, hand in hand. The room was a chandelier dream. Polished marble floors, gold-draped tables, champagne flutes clinking between manicured fingers. People wore diamonds like they were ordinary. Vanessa walked slowly, her heels clicking like an outsider's echo. Eyes turned. Some smiled, politely, distantly. Others whispered behind satin gloves and wine-stained lips. She wasn't one of them. Not with her borrowed dress, not with her soft curls instead of sleek buns, not with the little black boy holding her hand, calling her Mommy in a room that only seemed to recognize mothers who wore designer gowns and carried last names like legacies. Still, Daniel beamed. He didn't notice the stairs. He saw balloons, the buffet table, the orchestra warming up. He tugged her hand excitedly, but Vanessa felt it. The tension. Like silk stretched too tight, she found their table, sat quietly, smiled when others didn't, thanked the waiter with too much warmth, just to remind herself she still belonged to the world. Then something unexpected happened. As guests rose to mingle, Daniel spotted a boy from school and ran to say hi. He was gone only seconds before he came back, eyes wide, cheeks red. He tugged on Vanessa's arm. "Mommy," he said, just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "They said you're not my real mom." The laughter was soft, just a few chuckles, but it cut like glass. A woman in pearls raised an eyebrow. A man with two white teeth leaned toward his wife and smirked. Vanessa's heart dropped into her stomach. She reached for Daniel, holding him close. "I am your mom, baby. Don't let anyone tell you different." He nodded, but looked uncertain now. Like the seed of doubt had been planted, and just as Vanessa turned to shield him from the whispers, the doors swung open. Gasps rippled across the room. A tall, glamorous woman stepped inside, blonde, radiant, and familiar. Vanessa froze. Daniel looked up at her. "Mommy, that lady, she looks like me." It was Rebecca, Daniel's birth mother. Back, beautiful, bold, and walking straight toward them. The program was halfway through. People were loosening up now, laughing louder, sipping wine like water. The room shimmered with forced elegance. the kind that made sincerity feel like a stain on the linen. Vanessa sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, trying to stay small. Daniel had wandered off to get a cookie and chat with a music teacher he liked. She kept glancing his way, like always, because Daniel was her heart outside her body. And even here, especially here, she felt the need to protect him. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, in the middle of a slow song from the orchestra and a speech about education bridging communities, Daniel came running, his little shoes tapping against the ballroom floor, cheeks flushed, cookie crumbs on his tie. He didn't care that they were in the middle of a fancy event. He didn't care that dozens of people sat in crystal chairs around them. He just threw his arms around her waist and said, loud enough for everyone near the stage to hear, "I love you, Mommy." The moment hung in the air, heavy as breath before a storm. A few people chuckled awkwardly. Someone dropped a fork. And then a voice from the next table, a man with salt and pepper hair and an ego big enough to need its own seat, leaned back and smirked. "Guess someone's had too much punch." Laughter rippled. Not cruel, but not kind either. The kind that dances on the edge of judgment. Vanessa froze for a moment. She smiled, softly, protectively. Her hand reached down and patted Daniel's head, smoothing his hair. "I love you too, champ." She said it as calmly as if they were home, in their tiny living room, curled up on the couch with cocoa and cartoons. But her heart was cracking beneath the weight of eyes. She could feel them. See the raised brows, the silent questions. Why is he calling her Mommy? Isn't he adopted? And just as she was gathering herself, the doors at the back of the ballroom creaked open. Heads turned, the room hushed, and there she was. A woman in a sleek, shimmering gown, high heels that clicked like power, hair pinned back in soft waves, diamonds dancing on her collarbone like ice in moonlight. Rebecca, Daniel's biological mother. Late, dramatic, beautiful. She didn't say a word, didn't need to, because her, face usually poised, went utterly still. She stood frozen in the doorway, staring across the ballroom. At her son, wrapped around another woman, a black woman, and calling her Mommy. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth parted, but no. Sound came. It was like she had stepped into a world she didn't recognize. Daniel didn't even notice her yet. His arms were still around Vanessa, his head leaning into the satin folds of her borrowed gown. Rebecca took one step forward, then another. The crowd watched her, not sure whether to look away or lean in. And Vanessa, she didn't move. She just looked up, right into the eyes of the woman who'd given Daniel life, and nearly lost him through it. There was no malice in Vanessa's eyes, no smugness, just something steady, grounded love maybe, the kind that had been built day by day, bedtime story by bedtime story. And in that moment, Rebecca's confident mask began to crumble, because the boy she'd once left behind had already found home. Rebecca didn't wait for an announcement or for the program to pause. She marched straight toward Vanessa and Daniel, heels clicking like thunder, masked in elegance. People parted for her like she was royalty or a storm. Vanessa stood slowly, her hand protectively on Daniel's shoulder. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew enough to brace for it. Rebecca stopped a foot away, the smile on her face tight as piano wire. "Hello? Daniel?" she said, her voice coated in sugar but sharpened underneath. "Do you remember me?" Daniel blinked up at her. His eyes scanned her expensive gown, the glitter on her neckline, the face that looked a little like his. And then, gently, almost apologetically, he said, "No, I'm with Mommy." The room gasped, subtle, but loud enough. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Rebecca's expression cracked, just slightly. She turned to Vanessa, eyes burning, lips pulled tight. "You've confused him," she hissed through clenched teeth. Vanessa's breath caught. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out the violins, but her voice, when it came, was even and soft. "I've only loved him." That did it. Rebecca stepped forward, but someone from the event staff, a woman with a clipboard and headset, quickly approached, whispering something about perhaps moving to the hallway. But Rebecca brushed her off like lint on cashmere. "I have rights," she said, louder now. "He's my son. I'm taking him to speak with me, alone." She reached out for Daniel's arm, but Daniel, sweet, anxious, observant Daniel, stepped back and clung to Vanessa's waist like a child who already knew what safety felt like. "No," he whispered. "I want to stay with Mommy." He buried his face into Vanessa's side. That's when the whispers turned to murmurs. Someone at table 6 muttered, "That poor child." Another person shook their head. "He doesn't even recognize her." Vanessa knelt down, arms circling Daniel protectively. "It's okay, baby. I'm right here." Rebecca was trembling now, not just with anger, but with something deeper: humiliation. Loss. She stood there, fists clenched in silk gloves, as her son held onto a woman she had never expected to compete with. Not her. Not this woman, and certainly not in front of the city's elite. The moment stretched like wire pulled too tight. Vanessa looked up at her and said quietly, firmly, "Maybe this isn't the place." Rebecca didn't respond because there were no words that could erase what had just happened. Her son didn't know her, but he knew love, and he'd chosen it. The room was still. No more whispers. No more awkward laughter. Just silence, thick and uneasy. Like the world itself had stopped spinning for a moment, Rebecca stood frozen, trying to hold her composure, one hand still hovering in the air, unsure if it should reach again for the boy who no longer saw her the same way. Daniel clung to Vanessa's dress, eyes darting between the crowd and the woman who'd once given him life. And then he spoke. His voice was soft, so soft you'd almost miss it, but it cracked through the stillness like thunder in a chapel. "You left me in that room." Every eye turned to him. "You said you'd come back." He looked up, eyes glassy. "But you didn't." A ripple of heartbreak swept across the room. Forks froze mid-air. Even the servers paused at the doorways. Rebecca's hand fell slowly to her side. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Vanessa didn't say a thing. She didn't interrupt. She didn't speak for him. She simply knelt, one arm wrapped gently around Daniel's small shoulders. And Daniel, he looked at her. That look kids give when they know who really showed up when it mattered. And in a voice just a bit louder, just a bit stronger, he said, "You came. Every night. You held my hand." A tear slipped down his cheek. "You're my mom." The words hung there, pure, final. And somewhere in the back of the ballroom, soft at first, a single person clapped. Then another. Then another. Not the kind of applause reserved for a speaker or a speech, but for truth, raw, undeniable truth. It swept through the room in waves. The claps grew louder. Some stood, others wiped their eyes. Vanessa's head bowed, overcome. She hadn't asked for this moment, hadn't needed a spotlight, but somehow it had found her. Rebecca stood amidst the growing applause, hollow. This wasn't how she imagined it. She'd worn the perfect dress, rehearsed the perfect smile, but none of that could rewrite what had been written in the quiet spaces of Daniel's memory, the empty bedtimes, the broken promises, the fear. Rebecca's chin trembled. For the first time, her armor cracked not from shame, but from something deeper. Grief. Grief for what she lost, and grief for what someone else had given in her place. And then, without a word, she turned. The heels that once screamed confidence now sounded like retreat. She didn't look back. Not once. Vanessa pulled Daniel into her arms and held him tight, and all around them the applause continued. Not for a dramatic reunion, but for the quiet, consistent love that had saved a little boy's heart when no one else had. The applause eventually faded, but something had shifted in the air, something no one would forget. Vanessa stood slowly, still holding Daniel against her chest. Her hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from something far deeper. Gratitude, love, and the overwhelming weight of a moment she never expected, but somehow knew was meant to happen. Daniel looked up at her and whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" Vanessa blinked fast to keep the tears in. She cupped his face gently and shook her head. "No, baby, you told the truth. Just then, a woman with a soft voice and a quiet confidence approached them. She was dressed simply, but there was a badge clipped to her blouse, Child and Family Services. She leaned in, gently touched Vanessa's arm and said, "That was the most powerful testimony I've ever heard." Vanessa could barely respond. Her lips quivered, but no words came, so she just nodded. That night, they left the gala hand in hand. No trophies, no headlines, but everyone who had been in that room left changed, because sometimes the bravest thing a child can do is speak their truth, and sometimes the most powerful kind of motherhood doesn't come through blood. Months later, the living room smelled of cinnamon and fresh linen. A small fireplace glowed in the corner. School projects were pinned to the fridge. Laughter echoed faintly from the hallway. On the mantel sat a photo, a snapshot from that unforgettable night. Daniel, eyes closed, face tucked into Vanessa's satin gown, arms wrapped tight around her, and behind the frame sat a folded paper. The official decree. Adoption. Finalized, Vanessa Morgan, legal. Guardian and mother of Daniel James Carter, Vanessa still taught third grade, still packed Daniel's lunches with silly notes, still sang him to sleep on hard nights when his fears came back. But now, she was mom. Forever. And Daniel? He started smiling more in photos, learned how to ride a bike, began drawing pictures of me and my mom for school projects, no longer asking the teacher if it was okay because it was. Everything finally was. Time passed, and Daniel blossomed. He joined his school's drama club, shy at first, then shining under the stage lights. He began writing stories too, not about superheroes or dragons, but about something far more magical, found families. Vanessa framed his first story and placed it right beside that mantel photo, the one from the gala. As for Vanessa, the woman who once avoided crowded rooms now stood in front of them, church halls, school gyms, community centers. She spoke not with grandeur but with truth, about foster care, about healing, about what love looks like when it shows up night after night. People listened, really listened. She wasn't just Daniel's mom anymore. She had become a voice for children, for mothers, for second chances. And every year on the anniversary of that unforgettable gala night, they dressed in something gold, not for fashion, but for memory. A quiet tradition between a boy and the woman who didn't just raise him. She chose him and he chose her right back.